Tell you a little story. 50 years ago in June, 50 years ago, long time ago, I was a very young guy. I attended Explo 72 in Dallas, Texas. It was a gathering of over 100,000 young Christians from all over the world for a week of evangelistic training, music, and spiritual encounters with other, mostly student Christ followers. Now, it was sponsored by Campus Crusade for Christ, co-hosted by Dr. Billy Graham. It was a seminal event in what was called the Jesus movement of the late 60s and early 70s, in which millions of young people turned from the emptiness of drugs, alcohol, and so-called sexual liberation to find a more meaningful life in biblical standards, personal morality, most importantly, a profoundly personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, many of us who found ourselves a part of the Jesus movement, or as some called it, the Jesus Revolution, were in some ways refugees from frustrating experiences with legalistic churches that provided very rigid rules of behavior that were considered right and wrong, but with no instruction as to the power to live up to such standards. Through small groups sponsored by Campus Crusade for Christ all over the world and the massive event of Explo, there was nothing less than an explosion of spiritual energy happening that started beyond the church, but which ultimately had a dramatic impact on the church. The best description of Explo 72 was that it was Woodstock for Christians. Really. On the final rally that was held outdoors on a hot Saturday afternoon, over 250,000 people gathered for a day of contemporary Christian music and a message by Billy Graham. Back in those days, there really wasn't a definition of contemporary Christian music. It was rock and roll, but with biblical and godly lyrics. It would later become its own musical genre and sadly become as commercialized as any other genre of music. But in the day, it was raw, organic, and unfiltered, but yet unapologetically prophetic and without doubt, straight-on gospel message. Explo 72 was life-changing for me. And best I can determine, it was for most all of the other 100,000 youth who gathered in Dallas. This past month, the 50th reunion of those who attended was held at the very scene of the original, the Cotton Bowl, just outside of downtown Dallas. I was supposed to be there. I had flights and hotel booked, and I was registered. But American Airlines canceled my flight just hours before I was to go. So I couldn't make it. But I did participate by Zoom at one of the sessions. And it's not the same as being there. But memories from 50 years ago flooded my soul with reminders of a crossroads in my own life that steered me a very different direction than I could have gone. I was from a very small town of about 8,000 people. And to be in an event with 100,000 people, man, it was overwhelming. I mean, there were more people in line for the restroom on any given moment than even lived in my hometown. And one particular moment was definitive for me on the Friday night of Explo 72. Billy Graham spoke on the importance of each of our lives being light in a dark world. We'd been handed a small candle when we entered the stadium that night, and we were told just to hold on to it. At the end of his message, Dr. Graham asked that all the lights in the Cotton Bowl be turned off. It was suddenly pitch dark. He then lit his candle from the stage, and he turned to Dr. Bill Bright, the CEO of Campus Crusade, and lit his candle. They, in turn, lit the candles of two others, and the 4 became 8, then 16, 32, 64, and beyond. And every second or so, the number of candles doubled, so that in a very short period of time, over 100,000 candles illuminated the Cotton Bowl, so that the orange glow of the flickering flames was so bright that people living in the Cotton Bowl neighborhood called the Dallas Fire Department to report the Cotton Bowl was on fire. Actually, it was, but not like they were used to. While the image of 100,000 candles lighting up the Cotton Bowl was a sight I'll never forget, It was actually another sight that proved to be life-changing for me that evening. Because when the lights were all turned off and Billy Graham lit the single candle, he told us that the darker things were, the more impact happened from the tiny light of a small candle. That moment, it was as if God reminded me that the world I lived in was dark and separated from Him. I felt inadequate, unprepared, insignificant, and unimportant in such a time and a place. But then and there, I was reminded that even a small light in darkness has an impact. Before that night, I doubted, quite frankly, I would ever amount to much or that I would ever do anything important. That moment changed that. And from that time on, I believe that God actually wanted to use me. And more importantly, that He could. I was never the same. And 50 years later, I still pray that that little light of mine will always shine.